life and my life is like a lamp to a world that is searching for the path. We have become the example of Christ, and we are now the light of the world. Can the world see the radiance of Christ in you?
Evangelism does not happen by accident. Discipleship does not happen by accident. If we're going to fulfill our God-given mission as a church, we need to be intentional and reach out and share and introduce people to Jesus Christ.
Africa is an amazing continent with 50% of its population under the age of 18. If we impact the children, we would have impacted the future of the church and the future of our world.
Each one of us has something to bring to the table. Are you willing to release your resources, surrendering your material goods or your gifts and talents or your time or your heart? What are you going to do?
If we're going to plant the 300 churches, if we're going to reach out to 1 million people through evangelism, if we're going to disciple 100,000 in this nation, and if we are going to have an impact with the poor, with the needy, with children, with all the others who are part of our communities around us, it's not going to happen unless you have committed yourself to the purposes of God and you have been faithful to live by those purposes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's such an honor to be here with you this afternoon, and I'd like to celebrate some of the crossroaders who I can see, like Precious and Zippy. Would you give it up for them? They're part of the team that's taking collection and ushering. It's such an honor to be here with you. I'd like to start by asking you a question, and I do have a few books, which are very nice resources that I'd like to give away to those who are willing to answer questions this morning. So let's start by just looking at the poster we have had for this month. If you would kindly put it up on the screen. There is something that is missing from this poster. I'd like someone to tell me what it is that is missing. If you do have an answer, I think you need to stand up very quickly, and the team will come to you with a microphone, and then you will have an opportunity to answer. If you get it right, they're actually going to give you a gift. So, I'm waiting to see. Okay, yes, I can see there's a hand that's gone up. Okay. What's missing from this poster?
It's the father.
What is missing is the father.
No, I'm sorry, the father is not missing. Let's clap for her for trying anyway. But no, I can see shoes that belong to a father right there. What is missing? You need to put your hand up. Someone will come to you with a microphone, and then you need to give us an answer. Okay, we've got an answer there. Yes.
The teenager's shoes.
The teenager's shoes are missing from that picture. Thank you. Let's clap. And please do give a book. I'm not sure whether you need the book, but someone around you probably needs it, so please make sure that they get it. The teenager's shoes are missing. And teenage is that time that sometimes we sort of wish that people would grow from being the young, nice, cuddly, smiley, obedient children they are, and suddenly become these reasonable adults who we are able to talk to. But unfortunately, that's not the case. Teenage does happen. Now, Eugene and Ruth did a really nice job of asking you to talk about your teenage experiences. And I have 4 more books that I want to give out. So I'd like to hear some teenage stories. If you heard a nice teenage story, or if you have a nice teenage story, it could be something awkward, could be something really uncomfortable. We heard some interesting things during first service. We have 4 books we want to give out. The first 4 people who are up and who the microphone can reach, we'd like to hear some of those teenage stories, events that happened to you in teenage that were imprinted on your mind and that you can still remember. So, the first 4, first book going out. Do we have a taker? Okay, I think I can see a hand and a microphone going. Okay, please tell us your name and tell us the teenage experience.
My name is Susan Lewa, but I'm giving the teenage experience of my neighbor here.
So are we going to give the book to your neighbor or to you, to Susan?
You'll tell us. Yeah, I found it very interesting because growing up, the parents were Christians and she didn't believe God exists. So the parents told her, whenever people were discussing about God, just keep quiet. Don't say whether you believe or you don't believe so that you don't confuse people. And I thought that was a very good choice because if they forced her, she would have just gotten lost. But in school, the teachers didn't know that. So during CRE, she just voiced her belief that there is no God. And the CRE teacher chased her out of the class, told her never come to my class. But out there, because of, I believe, the influence and the prayers of the parents, God himself spoke to her. She just started crying, and she gave her life to Christ. And today she's here.
Oh, that's a beautiful story. Thank you very much. I think between you and your neighbor, you have the wisdom to decide who keeps the book. 3 more books to go. Do we have 3 stories? 3 stories going. Okay, I see a microphone going in at the back. Let's hear your story.
My name is Wambui Mbesa. I'm following the precedence that has been set, so I'll say the story of my neighbor, who is my husband. Okay, so he's telling me this story. I've heard it for the first time, even though I've been married 24 years. So when they were growing up in Makueni, they were looking after the goats and so on, but the neighbor's goats came to their shamba. So he's got, all his brothers went after these goats and really beat them up until they went home maimed back to their, neighbors. So the neighbor reported them to the chief. Actually, the neighbor reported the father to the chief. Anyway, so there was a little case. I think the dad didn't do anything because, the goats needed to be whacked. And anyway, yeah, that's his story. Found it very funny.
Thank you very much. That's a really good story. And you will get a book that I believe will benefit my armor bearer, Kelly, today. Those are her parents. Thank you very much. Let's clap for them. I think we have a couple more books to go. Any more stories? Microphones, I can see hands going up. Okay, we are hearing another story. Let's hear that one.
Praise the Lord.
Amen.
My name is Njogu Mwiruri. I have a funny story. So, when I was young, I was those cheeky guys. And my mom, it was on a Saturday, my mom was supposed to go to a wedding. And before she left home, she said, I don't want to see you in that wedding, because I know you'll follow me. So I waited till she left. Then I just put on some good clothes. Then I started going. So I hid from my mom the whole wedding. Then we went for the reception. I didn't see her, but her friends saw me. So her friends told my mom that I can see your son. So she was like, my son is supposed to be home. So she came, she found me. Then she was so nice. She said, oh, you came to the wedding and I want you not to come. So she was like, okay, you eat, have fun. I've forgiven you, so there's no problem. So we were so nice, we were so friendly. So we got home. So when we got home, I disappeared. I didn't want to stay there because I knew she was just playing me. So So the bad thing was, I didn't go so far. I went to the neighbors. So she just shouted, "Njogu, where are you?" So I shouted from the neighbor's place and I was like, "I'm here." So she told me to come home. And that's the first time I was beaten completely naked. Like she whooped me. And the bad thing was, all my friends were home that day. So it was like a bad experience. So I didn't want to cry, so I nikajikaza. Then I waited for my friends to go home. Then I cried.
Njogu, thank you for that story. You're still, I think, just barely out of teenage. I don't know who you're going to give that book to, but we totally feel for you. Thank you so much for sharing. We have one last book, one last story. And I'm not in control of the mic. Someone's helping me with the mic, so... Okay, there's one story coming from that side. I don't know if anyone's going to beat Njogu's story today.
Hi, church.
Hi.
My name is Elizabeth. While mine is a bit similar to Njogu's because of the beating, but I'll just give it out. I used to be in school in town. Our school was just right in town. So we used to be given cash for lunch. And this week I was given and I pocketed mine. So when I went to school, during lunchtime, I followed my friends to town because they used to go to a certain place where they have lunch, but it's cheaper, so you get to pocket some cash. This day, I don't know who told my dad. I've never known up to today. I kept on asking him, who told you that that's the place I go for lunch? It was, in school, it was 25 shillings. But where we used to go, it was 10 shillings, chapati supu. So I went there for a week, but he followed me for a week. Every single day at lunchtime, he would come there, see what I eat, and then he knows how much I've pocketed. And at that time, Tuskie's supermarket it was the first supermarket to come to Eldoret, and it had floors, first floor, second floor. So we would go with the remaining cash with my friends. We eat sweets, and then we go back to school. He did that for a week. The next week, he still gave me cash. So after giving me on Monday, he asked me in the evening, "Ulilipa lunch?" Nikasema, "Eh." Akaniambia, "Wapi receipt?" I told him, "Nitapewa kesho." So he told me, "Are you sure?" Akaniuliza, "And the place you go every day at lunchtime, where do you actually go?" I eat lunch in school and go back to class. He told me, he took a cane and beat me. "Any question you lie, unachapwa. Any question you lie, unachapwa." By the time it was getting to midnight, I had been beaten and not admitted. So he told me, "I know where you go." Now when I realized my mom is on this end, my dad is on this end, I'm in the middle. Nikienda huku, I get beaten. Nikirudi hivi, I get beaten. Trust you me, I was beaten up to around 3 a.m. And the last thing is taking an altar call because you've just lied to God. So I did very many altar calls. Up to now, I can't lie to my dad, and I can't lie because he told me, every time you lie, you need to get saved because you are not saved. That's my story.
Elizabeth, thank you for sharing that story. Thank you very much. So many stories about teenage, and some of the things that happen to us in teenage stay with us for the rest of our lives. We remember them over and over and over again. This morning, I hope that there's something that I'll say that the Lord will speak to you about that will help you help the teenagers in your sphere of influence. It may be your child, maybe your neighbor's child, maybe a niece, a nephew, or just somebody who's in your sphere of influence, that the Lord will say something that you might be able to hear and might be able to help them. Let me start by sharing some resources that I have found useful myself during the years that I've been parenting and also that I've been working with teenagers. Love is an important ingredient for all of us, but even more so for the teenagers. And learning about the languages of love is important because you may be expressing love to a teenager who doesn't hear you because their language of love is not the same one that you speak. And regardless of how much you keep trying to hammer it in, they simply don't hear because you're not expressing it in a manner that they can understand. The book, That's My Teenage Son, I found very useful because I had 4 teenage sons growing up in my household. The book that says, Being the Parent Your Teenager Needs, it's a devotional. It's one I found very useful because I realized it was not just about making my teenagers be who I wanted them to be, but it was about my being available for them and understanding what they were going through their teenage years. And the Praying Parent book helped me and helps me even today. The times when I think that there's nothing that I'm doing right or nothing that's working, staying on my knees has always been very helpful. Personalities are important. We act in a certain way because we are wired to behave in a certain way. The teenager who is most like you is the one who will irk you the most. One, because they remind you of your own failures. They also reflect the same challenges you had as a teenager and that you may or may not have resolved. And so the things they go through are more likely to traumatize you and make your life difficult. I recommend these books as good resources that will help you as you're parenting or as you're in a space where there are teenagers. This is a good segue for me to show pictorial evidence that once upon a time, I was a teenager. And when I was a teenager, I was the 4th, still am, among 5 siblings. My parents practiced what my sister and I called successive family planning. What it meant is the next child showed up before they had figured out what to do with the previous one. So every year, they were shocked to see there was another baby in the household. We were very, very close in age as a result. But what also made us grow close was because my mother was a firm believer in what we called collective responsibility. She believed when one had sinned, all had sinned. Therefore, everybody bore the consequences of the action of one of us. This made us learn either to all do the thing or all of us would ensure nobody did something that got us into trouble. My youngest brother was particularly good at being the one who my parents would pick out to find out what we had been up to. And because he was, at the end of 5, you're sort of, when one is 5-year-old, you are barely 1. By the time my eldest brother was 10, he was barely 5. He was the one they would ask, what did they do? And he would say, I won't tell you. I won't tell you that they climbed the roof today. Of course, there was generosity that followed there in terms of very warm backsides. And my mother particularly had the habit of asking you to go and pick your choice of what she would use to punish you. We had a morning glory flower that was at the end of the garden, and it had very stout branches that for many, many years warmed our backsides successively. My mother practiced what we also called benevolent dictatorship. I thought I was a benevolent dictator, but my sons firmly informed me I was not. They said I was a dictator for sure. I imagined I was democratic, but they didn't see evidence of it. My siblings and I felt like we blinked, and suddenly teenage years were gone, and we were in our 50s. And it has been a joy to grow up with my siblings and have the opportunity to parent together and to grow together. And I have the privilege of being a mother of 3 grown sons. 3 grown sons who are yet a little bit at large, I will say, still somewhat available in case there's someone interested out in the audience. But I also have another son who, anybody interested, I'm sorry, he's already taken. And a very lovely daughter who was brought up for me by some very kind parents who did a wonderful job. They have made me a very proud grandmother of 1 grandson who's a year and 4 months old. He's called Leo. Leo actually doesn't know he has a grandmother. I know that I have a grandson. What Leo knows is there are some people who get very excited when they see him. So we have these conversations which I'm not quite sure that we understand each other, but we are very happy to be in each other's space. I've also had the joy of many mentees, so I've had the opportunity to be grandmother over and over again. In addition to that, I've had the joy of being in the space where I interact with the teenagers who you entrust to us in the space of Crossroads. And over the year, the 2 years that we have them, we have the opportunity to talk with them, to teach them, to grow with them, to learn with them. We also have the opportunity to teach them about the choices they make and the consequences. Some of these consequences are quite exciting, as you can see. Consequences span from small infringements to large ones. We have opportunities to go to camp and to have them practice and to make use of their skills, mental and physical. But it's also a space in which we have a lot of fun. We have opportunity to explore the gifts and talents that they have. And we thank you for the opportunity to really interact with these teens that are in our space. So I'm waiting for the next. They have opportunity to have lots of fun. And they do enjoy their time with us. Usually at the end of the year, they are quite reluctant to leave that space and go into our XP, which is our youth church. We graduate them at the end of every year, allowing them to think about the transition they're making from childhood into young adulthood. And in this space, I also serve with a very, very dedicated team of not only staff, but also volunteers who give of their time, their effort, their love unconditionally. They really, really go all out to serve your teens. In this space, the teens talk to us. They tell us many things. What are some of the things that they're telling us as their teachers? They say the following to us. They're thankful. They're actually very thankful that we're teaching them. They thank us for being role models. They thank us for telling them about God and telling them how much it is that God loves us. It's a difficult space to be in. Sometimes they're very disobedient. Sometimes they're very noisy. We give them a lot of rewards for learning their memory verses, for carrying their Bibles, notebooks, and pen, helping them to learn the discipline that is important. They thank us for being patient with them, even when they're challenging. They also tell us things that they want you, their parents, and significant others in their lives to know. They know that you love them, sometimes. They know that you try your best for them, and they appreciate it. Occasionally, they will say to us, "My parents are the best." They're grateful that you provide for them what they need for school, what they need for living, a roof over their head. They also know that they make mistakes and that they're not perfect. And they're really grateful when you give them the space, especially when they know they've made really big mistakes. They get hurt, however, and in this electronic age, phones seem to compete for the attention that they need. They talk about parents being very upset if they have their phones when their parents are speaking, but when they speak to their parents, the parent is on the phone, totally ignoring them. They say you don't listen to them enough. You don't hear what they're saying. Sometimes they feel you don't understand them. And you don't even remember what it was like to have once been a teen in their space. They get hurt when you treat them differentially if they have other siblings. And when you are unfair, that really causes deep wounds. Don't shout at your teenager. It's one of the things that really hurts them. Treating them as if they're children, shouting at them, being unkind, jumping to conclusions without hearing everything they had to say, those cause really deep wounds. Fairness is one of the things, and justice, that teenagers are very strong about. They really want you to be fair. If you hear nothing else that I say today, please remember just one thing. Listen to the teen who's in your life. Listen, listen, and listen. And set them a good example. Because they will do not what you say, but what it is that you do. Now, for a long time, we used to think in the medical world that the first 2 years of life, there was a lot of brain development, which is still true. And then we thought in the early years of teenage, 13, 14, there'd be a lot of brain development. We thought it stopped then. We now know better. Brain development goes all the way to around the age of 25. I'd like to invite you to watch this short clip with me that I think will help make this even clearer.
Between childhood and adulthood, our hormones kickstart a phase of significant change. And while the physical changes of adolescence may be obvious, less visible are changes that these hormones trigger in our brains, which might just be responsible for turning our teenage years into a bit of a roller coaster. Throughout our lives, our brains undergo a process called neural pruning. The synapses through which our neurons communicate are either lost or strengthened, depending on how much we use them. Well-used synapses grow strong, while the weaker ones fade away. It's this process that makes us capable of faster, clearer, and more complex thought as we grow up. But, crucially, pruning happens at different rates in different areas of the brain. By the time we're adolescents, the neural networks that communicate emotion, risk and reward are well developed, while others, which may help us to plan, prioritise, think logically and moderate our social behaviour, are yet to mature. So, a potential mismatch between our emotion and our judgment arises just as our emotional and social worlds are becoming more complex, making an increase in social anxiety quite normal at this time. Researchers at the University of Oxford want to know how this might affect our behaviour as we progress through our teenage years. In a recent study, they focused on the social worries many of us feel as adolescents. When presented with photographs of ambiguous social scenes and asked to imagine themselves in the picture, anxious younger teens were more likely than others to perceive negativity. But while these heightened emotions and the struggle to control them can make adolescence a difficult time for some, it's also a golden time for learning and growth. The adolescent brain is particularly agile and flexible, and as such, it's especially open to new opportunities, new technologies, and new experiences. So while our teenage years may feel pretty weird, they're also pretty wonderful.
The adolescent years are a time of development. It's a critical time when there's a lot of growth in terms of the connections of the brain. And there's a difference between the emotional development and the actual cognitive ability to make sense of things and think in a very logical manner. It explains a lot of the things that we see in teenagers that sometimes we mistakenly think is just open rebellion and difficultness. It explains even their need for a lot of sleep, the reasons they're choosy about what they wear, what they eat. There's a lot of it that's just simply biology. It also explains why they take such risks and why some of the things that we think should be very obvious when we are older adults are simply not obvious or do not make sense to the teenager. So it's not just teenage hormones, it's also actual development within their brains. We even know that IQ does increases between the ages of 13 and when they finally get to 25. So it's not a time to think, this is it, they're formed. No, they are still growing. I'd like to suggest 5 lessons that I have learned over the years of being a mother of teenagers and also working in the teenage space. And I want to share it using the story of King David. David the king, the shepherd, the man who is described as a man who was after God's own heart. And I hope that as we illustrate these principles, that there'll be something that you can take home, that you may be able to use to influence your teenager. The 5 are rooted, reach, represent, rebellion, and redemption. Let's start with rooted. In the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 12, verse 15 to 17, and the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 18 to 33, there's 2 stories that I would like to use to illustrate David's love for his children. The first one is David and Bathsheba's son, a child who ideally would not even have been conceived. And I'll come back to the story of David and Bathsheba a little later on. David was told this child would not survive. What he had done was wrong, and the Lord said this child would die. David loved this child unconditionally. He wept, he pleaded, he fasted, he prayed. He did everything that he could to try and save the life of his child. It was not to be, and this child passed away. Unconditional love. It didn't matter how this child had been conceived, David loved him. Another story, 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 33. In 2 Samuel, we read about David's son Absalom, a handsome young man who was very rebellious, and we'll talk about him again a little bit later. Absalom tries to take the kingdom from his father. In the process, as the soldiers are fighting back, David says to them, "Please spare my son." He was asking them to spare a son who had caused him a lot of grief, who had overturned the kingdom, had caused a lot of people their lives. The soldiers did not obey David, and they killed Absalom. Verse 33, when David hears that Absalom has been killed, he weeps and he cries, to the extent that the soldiers who had been rejoicing in victory even become ashamed. He says, "Absalom, my son Absalom, how I wish that I had died in your place." Unconditional love. That is the first thing that our teenagers need. They need to be rooted in unconditional love. Your teenager needs to know that you love them, not because they've done well, not because of good grades, not because they've obeyed you, but just because. That you love them unconditionally, that you are there for them. That is what gives the teenagers the space to explore, to grow, to learn, to test their independence, knowing that you have your back. It's a kind of love that God has for us, unconditional. It doesn't depend on anything. It is love just because. If you do not know your teenager's love language, it's very hard to express this. You may be trying to show them you love them, but they don't understand it. But it's the pillar on which they will be able to build their lives if they know they are loved unconditionally. Let's go to our second word. It's got reach. What do I mean by reach? To illustrate this principle, in 1 Kings chapter 1, from verse 28 to 38, we talk about Solomon, the man who's described as the greatest king who ever lived in Israel. David clearly reached out to Solomon in some way. He prepared him to be king. He connected with him. He taught him his values. He taught him about God. He taught him about his faith. He found things that he and Solomon could have in common. He also ensured there was a community around Solomon who would support Solomon in this quest. Our teenagers need to have a space in which they can connect with us. We need to reach out with them. Do you even know what your teenager is interested in? Do you know what they like to do? Do you spend time with them? Is there a safe space in which you can teach them their values as they learn, where your values can be transferred to them? Not in a lecturing environment, but in one in which they feel safe enough to be able to talk with you and understand. Is there a community that is supporting you, helping you to be able to bring up this teenager? It could be the auntie who allows them to cook in their kitchen, if they're interested in that. Or the uncle who goes to the car show with them. Or you're just spending time to let them know and see how you live your life. Are you reaching out to your teenager? We do not raise them in a silo. We need a community around them. And you need individuals who can walk alongside you in this way. Now, if you don't even know what your teenager is interested in, that's already a big question mark for you. Have you any idea what they like? When was the last time you listened to what they were interested in? Or do you immediately say, change the channel, don't watch that? When was the last time you sat with them and watched even a movie that they like, not one that you like? With 4 sons growing up, I ended up having to watch action movies that I would never have chosen to watch. In fact, in the first 5 minutes, I'd be like, everybody has died. There's nobody else in this movie. Remember that their interests can change over a period of time. So don't stick to one thing and say, this is what you're interested in, it must stay this. It's part of their growing process. Let's move on to the next word. There are many things that King David did very well. There are some things he didn't do well. This is a big challenge for us, all of us. Represent. Your children will do not what you say, but what you do. David, in his relationship with Bathsheba, set the stage for a lot of pain in his own family and within his own children. He committed adultery. He killed Bathsheba's husband, or had her killed, at his command. We demonstrate for our teenagers what we want them to live out. We cannot preach water and drink wine, literally. By the way, your teens are very smart. Is there something you have that's password protected that you think they've never seen? Bad news, they know it. Do you think that your phone is locked and they have no idea how to open it? They know exactly what your password is. Just rest assured, that secret corner where you've kept a stash of something, which you think your teenagers have never ever found out, they know exactly where it is. One day, just ask your teenager to find something for you that you have no idea where it is. They will bring it to you. What you live out is what your teenager will see, and that's what they will choose to do. Live an example of what you want your teenager to become. Make choices that allow your teenager to make similar choices when they have that opportunity. What you demonstrate is what they will do. Teach them the discipline that they need to be able to make the right choices. Rebellion is our next word, and indeed, David reaped the seeds of his having demonstrated things to his sons that caused rebellion in them. The first one is his son Amnon. Amnon raped his sister. Really, really sad. Even worse, Absalom decided, plotted, and killed his brother Amnon to pay back for Amnon having raped his sister Tamar. Death within a family, partly as a result of the choices that their father had made and demonstrated to them. Absalom is sent in exile, comes back when his father forgives him. Has he learned? No. He goes ahead and tries to take his father's kingdom. Not only does he try and take the kingdom, he even dishonors his father by sleeping with his father's concubine, really bringing shame to the family. It's very important that we learn early to set boundaries for our teenagers. Decide what are the things that are negotiable, what are the things that are non-negotiable. Now, what do I mean by that? There are some things that are non-negotiable because they will cause harm. Alcohol, drugs, for a teenage developing mind, that is a deadly cocktail. It's setting them up for trouble. They're the things that we fight outwardly that we don't really need to fight because they will change. Their hair could be purple today and green tomorrow. The hair will grow out. It will be cut. So don't fight the things that you don't need to fight. Set the standard for the things that are really important, the things that you do not and cannot afford to give space on because they are non-negotiable. We agreed with my sons way ahead of time. What were the non-negotiables? What were the things that had consequences? And the consequences were meted out. I had learned from my mother collective responsibility. One sinned, everybody paid for it. And they learned to keep each other in check. They learned to come and say when one of them seemed like they were going out of line, the others would actually snitch. They would give them a chance to come and confess themselves. If they didn't, they snitched. Because they had learned that there were some consequences that were so severe we could not afford to give them space. Rebellion, however, can be harmful. And you need to differentiate between when it's rebellion, that is just an outward show of independence and growth, and when it's rebellion that needs intervention. When it needs intervention, please seek help. Teenage depression, teenage suicide, these are realities, and they can happen. If your teenager is showing signs of going off the edge, please get help. Get another significant adult who they may be able to open up to. Don't see signs that your teenager might be involved in drugs and think, oh, well, it's just a roll of cannabis. What else could it be? It can do damage. It can cause a lot of harm. please don't ignore the signs. If it's beyond what you can do, get help. It's not a failure to get help for someone else to walk alongside you with your teenager. Others have walked, are walking, and will walk those painful shoes. Don't walk it alone. Let someone walk with you. We live in a broken world, and we have imperfect parenting skills. None of us will always do what we're supposed to do at the time we're supposed to do it. Redemption is the last word that I want to talk about. Redemption because God offers real forgiveness, and God sees the big picture. Let me read to you from the book of 1 Kings chapter 3, and this is Solomon when he had become king, and he is speaking to God. It really does remind me of God's redemptive purposes. I'm reading from what is called the African Study Bible. And 1 Kings chapter 3, starting from verse 5. That night, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream. And God said, "What do you want? Ask, and I will give it to you." Solomon replied, "You showed great and faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he was honest and true and faithful. And you have continued to show him great faithfulness by giving him a son to sit on his throne. Now, O Lord my God, you have made me king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. I don't know my way around here, and I'm in the midst of your own chosen people, a nation so great, so numerous that they cannot be counted. Give me an understanding heart that I may be able to govern your people, and that they may know that I may know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern a people so great?" The Lord was pleased with what Solomon had asked, that he had asked for wisdom. So God replied, "Because you have asked for wisdom to govern my people with justice, and you've not asked for a long life or wealth or for your enemy's life, I will give you wisdom and understanding, such as no one has ever had before you, and no one will have after you. And I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches, and I will also give you a long life, if you will be faithful to obey my commands." Remember that Solomon is a son birthed out of a relationship that should never have happened, David and Bathsheba. Yet God's redemption shows through. At one time in my household, my young men used to sag their trousers. They sagged so much that I would hold my breath thinking, surely something is going to fall down. I even learned that walking with sagging trousers is an art. You even tie a belt to it. I would ask, why tie a belt if you're even going to sag trousers? God's redemption definitely comes through. One of my sons during his teenage years had a t-shirt, and his t-shirt said, "I am awake and I am out of bed. What more do you want?" I learned to live with it. The one t-shirt I had really wanted to get when they were teenagers and I never managed to find was one that says, "My mother is an ATM, an automated teller machine," because that's what it often felt like. It was always mom this, mom this. I didn't find that t-shirt. If you ever find it, please do let me know where it is. But the reality is that God works out his purposes. Solomon was considered the wisest man, the greatest king in Israel, from a relationship that we know probably should not have happened. We imperfect in our parenting. We do not always get it right, but God does, and he has the big picture. And we parent for him because he sees the big picture and he knows where they're going. So ultimately, he uses what we have for his own purposes. It's our responsibility to do our best, but to remember that these teens are his, and his redemptive purposes will work in their lives. I do have good news for you. Teenage comes to an end. It actually is a season, and it comes to an end. And the 14-year-old who seems so unreasonable, by the time they get to 21, they are surprised at how much we have grown. because they realize they have also helped us to grow up. So there is hope. There's hope for a better tomorrow, and there's hope that teenage will actually end. But teenage is an exciting opportunity to give those young people the opportunity to explore to their fullest potential what they can become as adults. However, it's very hard to pass on what you don't have. Many of us carry wounds from our own teenage years. The pain, the unfairness, things that were inflicted upon us and that maybe we've never quite gotten over. And sometimes these can create a barrier to our own parenting or our own being in the space of teenagers who are around us. In closing, I'd like to take a few minutes for us to just pray and pray for some of these issues that may have been part of our own lives and that may make our parenting teenagers difficult today. So I'd like you to join me in just bowing down your heads. And I'd like to walk us through a few prayers in the next few final minutes. Maybe you're here, and when you think about your teenage years, it was a painful time. There are embarrassing moments that still make you break out in sweat. There are things that happened that really caused you discomfort. Maybe nobody even told you they loved you. Nobody even seemed to care. Nobody bothered. And maybe there are wounds you're still carrying today that may make it very difficult for you to parent or be in that teenage space and help others effectively. If you're here and you have pain, you have challenges, I'd like you to just put up your hand and then put it down. You're not putting it up for me. You're putting it up for the Lord to see. To say, yes, there are areas in my life where I need prayer. I need to resolve and put to rest some of the things from my own teenage years so I can be a more effective parent in that teenage space. Please just put up your hand and then put it down. Thank you. Some of you, however, your challenge is reaching out. You have no idea what your teenagers are interested in. You haven't even sought them out. And you're saying, pray for me. I need to be able to connect with my teenagers. I must reach out to them. I need to find out what they're interested in. I need to create that community that can support my teenager to reach their full potential. Please put your hand up and put it down. Thank you for those hands. This is the most difficult one, representing. Maybe your life is not where it ought to be. There are things that you're doing, there are dark, hidden corners. And you're thinking, if my teenager follows this example, this would be really, really sad. There are things you need to change in your life so that you can represent the adults that you want your teenager to grow up to be. If you want us to pray for you about representation, please put your hand up and then just put it down. Thank you again for those hands. For some of you, the prayer will be around rebellion. The teenager in your space may already have started taking steps that show clear rebellion. And you're saying, I need help. I need help to help this teenager, and I also need help for myself. And I need to be able to find someone to walk alongside and help turn the tide of rebellion. If you have teenagers in your space who are in that rebellious phase, would you put up your hand so we can pray for you as well? Thank you. Please remember that God's redemption is indeed true. God redeems over and above anything we could ever expect. Let us pray. Our Father and our God, we are reminded that indeed you loved us while we were yet sinners. Unconditional love that asks nothing of us except that we give ourselves to you. And we want to ask, Father, that indeed we would not only experience that love, but that we would be willing to express it to the teens you have placed in our space. Please help those who need to reach out to their teenagers, find common ground, connect with them, create a community that can support these teens. For those who are saying, my life is not quite what it should be, would you deal with those issues in their lives that they need to hand over to you? Would you allow them a new space, a new beginning that allows them to represent the adults that they want their teenagers to grow up into? Father, where there is rebellion, step into that situation. We pray that you would turn the tide, that there would be no teenagers that end up in a circumstance that we will highly regret or that will be unchangeable because of decisions that they have made. We ask, Father, that you would turn that tide, that indeed there may be redemption in every instance where there may have been rebellion. And we thank you for the gift of your Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, who gives us the hope that indeed redemption is real, and redemption is something we can hold on to, not only for now, but into eternity. For we ask all this in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.